What are we going to do about it? Like I said, I'm a good strategist. I'm quite attached to strategy. I believe it's important. We cannot let it sit. So we sat together and said, hey, let's see what we can do about that. And we came up with this framework that is deceivingly simple. Mind my words, deceivingly simple. Because anything that has 3 steps and that sounds like no-brainers sounds simple. But I would argue anything that is good is always simple with hindsight. So bear with us, please. So we looked at all the different issues. We read all the literature that you can imagine. We had done that anyway, by the way, because we like doing that. It's our job. It's our profession. And from that, we distilled these 3 principles around which strategy needs to be reimagined and redone, and a new methodology needs to be developed. The first one is future in strategic inspiration. Most strategies start with extrapolation of past patterns and of the current. In the past, a good strategist was a good analyst, could handle spreadsheets really well. I'm exaggerating a bit, but not that much. And it was always extrapolation. In a world where everything is changing, extrapolations of the past or the present is nonsense. Makes very little sense. You need to understand the present and the past. That's all right. But the extrapolation makes very little sense. So what actually you should do, instead of current out, you need to do future in. That's the direction in which you need to redo things. You need to reimagine the world that's taking place, of your company, of your customers, of your competitors. Look really far ahead, preferably much more than 2-3 years. You need to look 10 or 15 years ahead and try to understand how that can impact yourself. That is not an exact science by definition, right? Because how can you predict the future anyway? You can only try to understand it and understand the choices, as you rightfully say. That is the first principle. I'll come back at all of them. So instead of current out, future in, number 1. Number 2 is you don't do strategy top down. We're in the boardroom with a few brilliant consultants maybe helping you, and that's it. And then once you've done it, you write it down and you throw it over the wall and you give it to management, middle management, to implement it. That doesn't work anymore. Maybe that worked in the 60s and in the 70s, but in a time when everyone is online, where every employee has an opinion and is not afraid of using it, where there's a war for talent going on, that way of handling strategy, the implementation of strategy, makes very little sense. What is really important is to actually involve and engage the employees in strategy right from the start. And I'll explain you later on. You will be surprised how much involvement there is and there can be and there should be. And it makes the strategy better. And you can also implement it better. That's the other reason for doing it. That's principle number 2. And principle number 3 is, instead of strategies that are sequential, 3 years, 3 years, 3 years, and then you redesign and redo it again, strategy becomes permanent, becomes continuous. And you need to think about strategy as a portfolio of strategies that is constantly reanalyzed, re-updated, and is a living thing. It's a fundamentally different way of doing strategy. By the way, if you do all of 3 added up, the role of the strategy department and of the chief strategist is changing fundamentally. It used to be a person who was very bright analytically, only used 1/2 of his brain cells, so to speak. And the future strategist, the one that is needed now, needs to have both sides of his brain. And not only his brain, also needs to understand how the world is working. I would argue it's becoming more interesting. But not everyone thinks about it that way, as you can imagine. So the role of the strategy department is fundamentally changing. These are the 3 principles. And we designed a methodology around that, tested that with clients and with prospects, and started to work with it. We are using it every day. Maybe not all 3 in the same level of depth, always everywhere. It's of course always custom made, but these 3 principles are always present. And increasingly so, I would argue, and works much better. The success rate is going up.